Hello, and welcome to the Race, Wealth, and Health Podcast, a podcast that serves to educate and empower while we explore the intersections of social justice, economic empowerment, and holistic well-being within communities of color. I am your host, Dr. Joycelyn Morris, and I invite you to join me as we dive deep into the crucial topics that shape our lives, challenge the status quo, and strive for a more equitable future for all. Hello. Welcome to Race, Wealth, and Health Podcast. I am super excited to have one of my classmates and friend, Professor Johnson, joining me today. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Doing well.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Professor Maurice Johnson, who some know as Nova, he's an educator, a researcher, and curriculum consultant. Currently, he serves as a doctoral student. At the same time, he's a graduate both of the Florida A&M School of Journalism and Graphic Communication, along with the Florida State University College of Communication and Information. He has presented academic research on the intersection of hip-hop culture and education and has explored not only multicultural education, but multicultural marketing as well. And so with that, again, I welcome and I'm excited to have you on the podcast, specifically as we are in Black History Month and so we're talking about hip hop and culture and the intersection with the history of hip hop and the intersection with Black history. So again, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you again for finding me worthy to be a guest.
Absolutely. So introduction, I forgot to figure out from you like how we met. So we both attended Florida A&M University for sure. I don't remember though when we met. I feel like
Me either.
probably freshman year.
Definitely freshman year. I
Yeah.
don't remember everybody from when we was 18, you know what I'm saying? Versus if you
Exactly.
came later. You was there at the beginning though, for sure.
No, definitely. We probably met on the set or something. Like who knows?
One
But we had a mutual friend.
for sure.
So obviously, yeah. So we've known each other for quite some time now. I'm not going to do the math. It's been a while since we were
Yeah.
freshmen.
That's gonna give them too much
Yeah,
information.
too much information. But yeah, it's been super cool to watch your journey, specifically when I think about freshman year to
Hey,
where you are now.
I
Um,
think about that all the time. Like,
yeah,
who'd have thunk it?
listen, not me. But no, all jokes aside, it's been super cool to watch your professional journey and just how you've been able to remain authentic to who you are in the work that you're doing, but still advancing education and some of the work. So kudos to you and everything that you've
Thank you.
done. We'll be including links to all of his stuff in the show notes, so listeners can definitely read up. But yeah, so like tell me a little bit about yourself. I mentioned that you're a professor, but tell our listeners a little bit more about what you currently do.
Okay, one of my roles right now, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Rodents Fellow Initiative, but it's a partnership with ESPN in which they're developing the next generation of Black sports journalists, specifically from HBCU. So that's a partnership with the United Negro College Fund. I was actually alerted to the opportunity by a fellow Rattler. We always trying to connect one another, and I'm thankful for that. And I've been doing that since August, just speaking to BCU student sports journalists and just advising them on not only their matriculation through their undergraduate program, but also guiding them on their plans post-graduation. But I'm just thankful to remain connected to journalism since that's what my bachelor's is in, as well as staying connected to HBCUs. And another role I've got is the HBCU faculty fellowship with the Propel Center that's housed in the Atlanta University Center. So we're focusing on tech-centered approaches to education. And of course, we know within our community, there's a lot of absence of STEM and tech-related opportunities. So I'm just trying to do my part and increase those within our educational communities. So that's some of the things that I'm on right now. I got some other stuff, some other irons in the fire as well.
I am sure a man of many hats and many talents. Walk us a little bit through your professional journey, because as you mentioned, you graduated from the School of Journalism, right? So
Right.
what did you do after that and kind of how did you end up back in or end up in higher ed?
Well, I remember getting my bachelor's and just remembering that journalists weren't making a lot. My magnet in middle school and high school was communication. So it was only natural for me to major in journalism, but I hadn't really thought about the pay because at that point, And even up until recently, I was more an idealist instead of a capitalist. And, just being a dreamer. And I didn't think about the financial implications of the choices that I made educationally. I was just like, I like to do this. So this is what I'm going to major in. But I just remember seeing the salaries and just thinking, man, something's got to give. So I started working. Do you remember Everest University with the commercials? Like, what are you doing? Why are you not signing up? You just,
I
got
do.
yeah. So that was my first job after graduation. I was an admissions representative for Everest,
Hmm.
but I was there before the commercials when we first set up on the block. But that was my first experience in postgraduate employment as well as within higher education. And while I was working, my auntie was
Hmm.
like, "So you gonna go to grad school?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she was like, "Well, if you get too used to making money, you're not gonna go back." So I started looking into grad programs, and actually one of our classmates, Melinda Lawrence, told me about the integrated marketing communications program at Florida State University. So I've decided I've always been into content creation in addition to the writing aspect of journalism. And we were increasingly becoming immersed within that digital realm. And one of the certificate programs was digital media. So I applied, I got in. I ended up getting not only that certificate, but I also got the graduate certificate in project management. What I didn't know was that by engaging in research, that would set the foundation for possibly a doctoral program later. So I wrote a master's thesis entitled "The Evolution of Commercial Rap Music," which basically was the foundation of this class that I developed, hip hop and global mass communication. But it was at that point where when you have your master's, you're eligible to teach. So I had went to our alma mater seeking an office position, administrative assistant or something. And the journalism division director at the time, Dorothy Bland, she was like, "Baby, all I got is this adjunct class, publication editing and design." I hadn't thought about teaching, at least at the collegiate level to that very moment, but I was like, "Yes, ma'am." And I
Right.
started off with one class, and then in the middle of the semester, professor departed for a managing editor position at a magazine. So I took over her section of that same class. So I had two classes. It was the fall of 2011. A lot was going on at the institution at the time. So I was learning from several different angles, as an educator, as an alumnus of our institution, and eventually as a doctoral student as well. So that's how it started. A couple years later, I became a full-time professor, and that's pretty much what I've been doing since then and is in the classroom.
That's awesome. Hats off to you, because listen, it's not easy being an educator, even at the higher ed level these
Love it.
days.
Not at all.
So
It's
I
tough.
always have a deep respect for all of our educators. So you mentioned you started out with music class, or at least one of the first classes that you created, I should say, was around like hip hop and
Right.
mass communications, right?
Right.
What's the thought around the intersection between hip hop and mass communications? Because I wouldn't necessarily have thought
Well,
much about those two together.
well, again, the first class I taught was publication editing and design, and I had never taught before. So my main thing was I already knew the importance of student engagement, just being a black male student in America. You know what I'm saying? A lot of us have a high level of intellect and had a high level of intellect early in age, but when we're not engaging with what we're learning, we check out. We knew something was up with the information that was being imparted to us on a daily basis. And some of us toughed our way through it. And some of us was like, I'm straight on it. So I always understood the importance of student engagement as an indicator of academic achievement, but ain't necessarily being good in a particular area. It could be just, do I like what I'm learning? So I was like, how can I get this subject matter across to them in a manner that meets them where they're at? And hip hop is the youth dominant culture. And I had previously seen it used when I was in high school. Like I said, communications was my magnet. So my teacher, Stefan Henderson, he was an HU grad. And this is where I first started learning about HBCUs as well, which is a whole nother story because I wasn't raised with parents that went to college directly out of high school. Like my pops, he went to the army when he was 18. My mother started working at Ford Motor Company, much like a lot of her relatives when she was 18, but she got laid off and joined the army, met my pops, and that's how I came about. But again, you coming into culture differently based upon your background, or really the background of your parents, you know what I'm saying? And, it was a lot of things that I learned being at a HB as a first time in college student versus, if you 2, 3, 4 generations deep, like the relationship is different.
Mhm.
So, like I said, he was an HBCU grad. He started putting us on game, but we did the TV show in the class, and he would always let us listen to music, vibe out. He dropped jewels on us about music samples because he was there in the '80s when it was what it was before it got to what it is now. So he was just always giving us game through the culture, and we could always listen to music as long as we had that rundown for the show prepared. We did a run through of the show. It was all good. Now, if the rundown was sloppy and the show went bad, it was dead. All that was deaded. But it kept us engaged in the subject matter because we wanted to be able to engage with the culture. So we got to be good at the cameraman. We got to be good at technical director. We got to be good at audio in order to continue to be able to do this. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna just use hip hop as a connector as well as a way to disseminate information. And I just remember one of the first assignments I gave was a magazine spread, but I had them watch Tupac Resurrection first. So when you pull up Adobe and it has the templates with the fake text already in there,
Mhm.
so they immediately, all right, I take the fake text out and write what I learned from Tupac Resurrection, had them listen to some songs, and they just got the graphic or whatever and, did the whole color alignment and made sure fonts were looking good over the image. And that was my first foray into using hip hop in the classroom. But as I started teaching more and more classes, I could incorporate it more. So that's what ended up happening when I became full time. I was teaching 3 or 4 different classes, and I
Mhm.
could immerse hip hop into the curriculum in each of them, and my students would continually achieve. So I figured, why fix something if it ain't broke?
No, fair. So you answered one of my questions, which was going to be, how did you even get into this exploration of hip hop? Which it sounds like when you were in high school, but I want to kind of go back to that because that's a very unique experience. I know you mentioned it was a magnet program, but the fact that you were putting together, I guess, with some of your classmates, putting together a show, and even that from a curriculum standpoint, like what it sounds like there were some things about that class specifically that stood out to you, even.
Yeah, because I'm sorry to interrupt. My
No, no,
bad.
no. Go ahead. You're good.
Well, the thing is, again, I'm a military child. So I moved to Virginia in the middle of ninth grade when my pops got stationed. And I had a double magnet at that time. I had communications and drama. I could have went off and been an actor or something like that if I had chosen to take that path. But I ended up sticking with communications. But at the time, the only way they could fit it into my schedule, I'm in ninth grade, but they had to put me in the 10th grade class. So the
Mhm.
ninth grade class, you were learning about how to use the camera, how to set up mics, how to run audio. This is before digital, so we were still using tape. So if
Yeah.
you the technical director, you switching tapes in and out of source one and source two of the interviews and stuff, as opposed to what we do now, which is just press buttons. So,
Yeah.
but we had to rotate between positions. So you had to be able to work the camera, you had to be able to do audio, you had to be able to be a technical director, you had to be able to be a producer. But I never had the ninth grade class. I was immediately in the 10th grade class. So I had like a higher level of the class early.
Yeah.
So the 11th and 12th grade class did the show. I was in 10th grade doing the show because I was in the 11th grade class. And I think also being with older students contributed to who I was also, because every year you get a little bit more mature. So them being about business just a little bit more than me made me a little bit more about business.
Right.
So the news show was our grade. We did the news show every day, Monday through Friday, right before lunch block.
Yeah. Cool. The reason why I asked about it is we'll kind of get a little bit more into that conversation later when we talk about curriculum, but I think it's just very interesting the use of that, right? Like being able to put on a show, being able to have that type of hands-on experience in high
Mhm.
school, to your point, and how it was engaging. for you versus just, yeah, a lot of learning and things that typically are done in
Yeah.
theory versus actual like practice.
Actual practice. And, unfortunately, there's not a lot of hands-on learning opportunities in underfunded school districts or underfunded schools specifically. And that's part of hip hop's innate connection to education. They started taking the arts programs out of the schools. So they started doing it in the street as an outlet, as a response to what was going on. Like that's all hip hop culture is. It's an artistic response to socioeconomic oppression. And the music is the commodifiable portion of it. So when people hear rap music, they automatically think the entire culture, but it's just not the same thing.
Hmm. So okay, I have a follow-up question. But you started to talk about kind of the history of hip hop. And then, so for our listeners, is there a difference between hip hop and rap? That's one. And then as you think about the history of hip hop, kind of bringing it to our conversation today too, you mentioned something about that history and it being a response of things. How does that history of hip hop intersect with Black history as we are looking to celebrate our culture in this month?
All right, let's tackle it one at a time. We're going to tackle the rap music
Fair.
and pop thing, then we'll
Yep.
tackle the connection to Black history. And you tell me when to stop or when I went off on a tangent and bring me back.
Totally fine.
Okay. So there's 5 elements of hip hop culture. The core 4 are MCing, DJing, b-boying or b-girling, and then the graffiti art. And the 5th element is the knowledge. So MCing is rapping, right?
Mhm. Okay.
That's rapping. Okay. Then the DJ slash producer, they're responsible for the sonic portion of hip hop culture. Then the B-boys and the B-girls or the break boys and break girls from which the term breakdancing came from. They're the physical aspect of the culture. And then graffiti is the visual aspect. And that's probably the element that's been around the longest, and the DJ at one point was the primary representative of the culture because they were throwing the parties. And then eventually they started inviting people up to get on the mic. And that's where 2 turntables and a mic, that whole phrase comes from. The DJ on the 2 turntables and then the MC, mic controlling, moving the crowd, master of ceremony. So they all correlate with multiple intelligence theory, which comes from a book called Frames of Mind by a Harvard graduate named Harold Gardner, and it correlates with linguistic intelligence. DJing correlates with musical intelligence, logical, mathematical intelligence, counting beats, and just knowing when to cut the record at what particular point. B-boying and B-girl and like dancing or whatnot, that's the bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Everybody can't dance, but that also transfers over to other realms, like being an athlete. It's a lot of people that's 7 feet tall, but a lot of them don't
Right.
have control of their physical gifts in order to make it to the NBA. So there's an intelligence, a mind-body connection that goes with bodily kinesthetic intelligence. And then graffiti is kind of visual spatial intelligence, much like an architect would have. Being able to draw something, then build it to scale. It's the same thing as somebody throwing up a tag on a wall that they had in their book before they did that. So those are the 4 elements. And again, the music is the profitable portion of hip hop culture. So you can see a lot of hip hop music because it is hip hop music. But when you say rap music, rap to me is a part of the entire culture, but not the same thing. And much like commodification, everything else is forgotten.
Yep. No, that's fair. And so to that point, even as we think about Black history and the history of hip hop, which was celebrated like 50 years last year, how do you see and make sense of the intersection of the two?
Well, hip hop is always a reflection of American society, and it's always been marginalized for its content. To me, it was marginalized to wait until 50 years to celebrate it when it's a global $1 billion industry that feeds everybody and that's immersed in every field and that everyone uses for their market. Everyone. There once was a time when they thought hip hop was a fad and it just kept going and going and going. And now, if you're not remotely aware of hip hop culture, you're just out of tune, because it permeates everything. When you watch NBA and NFL games, it's hip hop music being played at the stadiums and it's hip hop music being played as they go to commercial. So it's everywhere. Again, everybody is not aware of the entire culture. They're just aware of the music. And then when it comes to us as a people, we engage with the music based upon our connection to it. Some people just like the beat. Some people appreciate the poetic aspect of the lyrics. And sometimes some of us are directly relating to the subject matter in certain songs. So there's just a deeper connection to the music and in particular to artists that are from the area that you from, because they speak into things and locations and events that you know about because you're from there too. So that's the geographical aspect of it. It's folk music from different areas, and everybody's talking about where they're from, what was going on as they were growing up, and how it affected them individually and the community as a whole. But, it's kind of shifted again. It's just a money maker to some people.
Yeah.
And that battle between art and commerce has always existed since the beginning of the culture. Even MCing it was considered a live performance art, much like teaching. Teaching is a live performance art. And most teachers are artists. And I think that culturally responsive educators always try to tap into that creative faculty and their students. And I didn't even know the term culturally responsive teaching until after I was doing it already. I was like, oh, it's a term for this. You know what
Well,
I'm saying?
I was gonna ask you if you wouldn't mind, again, defining for our listeners. I wanna assume that they know what culturally responsive teaching, education, curriculum is.
Culturally responsive teaching, also known as culturally relevant pedagogy. There's also a term called culturally sustaining pedagogy because the field, it continues to evolve and you want to continue to utilize vocabulary that most accurately reflects what that body of knowledge is. But is utilizing the culture of the students in the classroom in order to increase that student engagement. And research indicates, it's not just me saying it because I've seen it and it happened live and direct and experienced it, but the data shows that student engagement has a positive impact on academic achievement. So to me, hip hop being the youth dominant culture, many Black kids listen to hip hop on an everyday basis. It was only practical to me to utilize hip hop in the classroom. And it's crazy to me when I get backlash for it because I'm like, why would you not use it? You know what I'm saying? But I understand why.
Well, fair enough. So I think you mentioned term is that like that hip hop guy, right? The hip hop professor. And like, why are you
And
passionate
that,
about it?
well, and I always try to do other things so they don't pigeonhole me
I
as
know.
the hip hop guy. Like, really, I'm the multicultural communications, but I just am firmly immersed in hip hop. But it was always there. Like, even as a child, wherever I was living, I was engaging with it. Like, I remember when my pops was stationed in Panama, the country, not the city, and listening to, I always say this, Cool Mo D. Like, I always remember listening to How You Like Me Now in Panama. And I remember moving back to the States and the culture, this is like 89, 90. The culture's starting to come more and more alive. And at the same time, the streets is crazy because the crack epidemic was wild. And that's an experience that I have to explain to my students because they weren't born until later. We were active witnesses to what was going on in its early stages, in addition to seeing how it's affected our community since then. Whereas they was born and it had already been going down for an extended period of time. But I remember listening to it in America and then moving to Germany and listening to it over there and absorbing it differently because I'm not in the country. Just even its availability is different because you're in another country. We only had one channel, AFN, the Armed Forces Network. So I wasn't really seeing music videos, but I was seeing magazine covers and my pops like, Death Row Records was always in the household. Like the Chronic was in the household, Doggy Style was in the household, All Eyes on Me, Dog Pound, everything was there. So that's part of it. It was just there. It has always been there. And then as you get older, you understand it. Before you like the words, you like the beat, it's jamming. But then you start immersing yourself in the content, what's being said, and for me, why it's being said. And that MCing element, a lot of young Black males pick up as we get older. So I was engaging with that during my early teen, late teen, early 20 years, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of conversation around hip hop now is bars, like the subject matter that's being discussed within the music, but also just how you rhyme, your delivery, is it complex? Is it simplistic? Like these are things that get discussed, but I don't want to come off as the old head, like, oh, y'all don't know nothing about no hip hop. So I always try to engage with the youth. I listen to all of their shit just like I listen to our shit. And that kind of keeps me in tune with how they thinking about the culture and gives me more of a understanding of how it developed to get to where we're at and where it's gonna go from here. And just like even teaching journalism, I tell students all the time, the best journalists are always good historians because you understand what happened 20, 30, 40 years ago to make what's going on today possible. Like I understand what's going on in Israel and the Gaza Strip because I understood what was going on after World War II because I lived in Germany. So I was getting exposed to different information, different ways, and seeing how information is distributed through the media. Just being a journalism professor, I can understand how messages are being presented, whether it's vocabulary wise or whether it's visual.
I was gonna say, to your point of talking about journalism, I thought you had brought up a good point because I think it feels a little questionable these days, right? In terms
Very
of
much
like
so. Very
what the
much.
journalism field looks like. And to me, I'm not in journalism, but outside looking in, especially when you think about some of our major news stations, it definitely feels like there's
It's
been
horrible.
a
It,
lack of like true understanding,
yeah.
wanting to genuinely represent the facts versus just a lot of picking and choosing sides. But how do you see hip hop and Black culture in general being represented when we think about communications and journalism? And what changes, if any, have you
Oh,
seen
oh,
over
well,
time?
we got the Black males, we got to be criminals. The Black women, y'all got to be harlots and, you know,
I haven't heard Harlot in a
that
that was like,
you know the imagery that they wanna project. You
yeah,
know the imagery is still being projected. One of my sources for my master's thesis was a book called The Hip Hop Wars by Trisha Rhodes, and she also wrote this seminal hip hop book called Black Noise. But she talked about the roles that hip hop artists take on, and she calls it the holy trinity of hip hop, I think, but it's the pimp, gangster, hoe, characterizations, in artists. So of course we're much more than that. And of course hip hop is reflective of slices of Black life, but they're going to take the most negative slices of our pie and present that as the de facto image of Black people in America as a whole. So again, the stereotypes, they're going to take whatever they can and push it in a particular direction while at the same time taking things that are known to be Black and utilize it in a completely different manner, whether it's taking, DEI and critical race theory and woke and all of that means Black to them,
mm,
or whether it's taking the slang, I'm hearing them say standing on business and just again, teenage suburban white males are the number one consumers of hip hop culture, and it's been that way since the late 1980s. So they're aware of that demographic existing. So again, it's necessary for people to understand the economic aspect of us being portrayed in this manner. And it's not that it means, well, I ain't gonna rap how I rap no more. It's just, all right, this how they using my music to their agenda.
mm. So basically, are you saying ideally there should be a little bit more of an awareness around what is being put out, or just more so how it's being
Uh,
repositioned?
I think that there's a space for all artists to tell their stories. I think that there's a certain amount of accuracy and authenticity in artists, just like I think there's a certain percentage of exaggeration and embellishment
Yeah.
or even outright lies. But your music sounds good.
Right.
And that's where we as consumers come into play, because if we continue to consume the content, then ultimately the powers that be, they're not worried about the negative detriment that they say hip hop culture has on the youth. They just worried about the money. But it's not about morals when it comes to capitalizing. Like, I think of all the companies and corporations and conglomerates that has something with hip hop 50 or 50th anniversary, and you've
Right.
never done nothing about hip hop ever. But here's an opportunity for us to capitalize, whether it's content wise in your television network and you got your documentary series that you're going to do, or
Yeah.
whether it's a concert series, just whatever you could do. T-shirts, like everyone makes money off of hip hop. So it's just all about tightening up, not gatekeeping, but tightening up who we give certain types of control within the culture. Like, we can do that. We can improve upon that for sure. And certainly we as consumers, we can speak with our money, and artists have to also be open to critique. You
Mhm.
know, social critique is not hating. If someone's telling the truth about a situation and you catch a stray, that's not hating. We know when people is hating. We know when people are envious. We know when people are jealous. But if someone is referencing your role within the larger scheme of things, there's no reason to take that personally unless they come at you sideways about it, in which case I completely understand.
Yeah.
But if it's respectful, then we should be able to dialogue. But again, the unwillingness or inability to address certain issues within the Black community, that's something that's always plagued us. It's bigger than hip hop culture. It's a lot of things that we don't discuss.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Enjoyed the show? Be sure to like and rate the podcast. You can find the Race, Wealth, and Health podcast on multiple platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. I also want to hear from you, so don't forget to connect with me on social media. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at Race, Wealth, Health. By joining the online community, you'll stay updated on the latest episodes, behind the scenes insights, and engaging discussions. Share your thoughts, comments, and questions there. I appreciate your support in sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues who may also find value in these conversations. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care, stay informed, and keep up the good fight for equality.